the other thing is when he was going through the Churchill papers, and I believe it was Bill Deacon who said to him, when you're going through the papers, you'll find things that you may want to write about later. So make a note of it, take a copy of it. And he did. And so he collected this vast archive. And when he sat down to write, he had all the books in front of him. He had all the papers in front of him. And he knew what he wanted to write because he had done his own research. And he had everything to hand.
Hello, Esther, or Lady Esther Gilbert, married to a British knight.
President Arnn.
How are you?
President Arnn, it's good to see you. It's good to be here.
You're a sight with sore eyes. I'm going to do something that as long as I've known you, how long have I known you now? A very long time. You're always reluctant to do it. We're going to talk about you. We're going to talk about where you were born and how you grew up, and that'll lead us up to how you met Sir Martin Gilbert. We're going to talk, before we get to that, a little bit about what you do these days, and I'm going to refer people to your great website, which is martingilbert.com, which you maintain, I noticed this very morning, assiduously. And it's a wealth of information. People should go to that. So, tell me about your parents, and where you were born, and how you grew up.
My parents and I and my children and 3 of my grandchildren were all born in different countries.
Oh, wow.
So I was born in Chicago. My parents were born in Eastern Europe. It's now an area that's northwest Ukraine, where my parents are from. When my mother was growing up there, it was Poland. When my father was a child there, it was Russia. And now it's Ukraine.
Huh.
So they came to Chicago, and I was born there. And then we moved to Idaho when I was very small. And so I spent my formative years in a small town in the mountains, and we were the only Jewish family.
Oh, yeah.
Which was interesting. Now there's a community there and a shul, and they've just hired a full-time rabbi, so that's very exciting.
Wow, good. I guess Jews are finding it uncomfortable in some of the places where they've congregated in America in recent years. And that's something we'll talk about a little bit. I think that's too bad. Well, I hope they find a happy home in Idaho if they're going there. They are beginning to find a happy home in Hillsdale, by the way. I'll talk about that too. You tell a wonderful story about your grandmother. I mean, it's a tragic and terrible story, too. And I mean, the one for whom you're named. Tell us about her a little bit.
I grew up hearing that my grandparents had been exterminated. I was a little kid. I had no idea what exterminated was, but I knew I didn't have grandparents around. And eventually, I found out what exterminated was, what it meant. So my parents came from the same area. My mother came from a little town, and she had her parents. She had 2 younger sisters, and in August 1942, they were all murdered with 10,000 people from their town and a few surrounding towns. They were taken to the nearby forest and shot. And in fact, in 2011, Martin and I were there. We spent 10 days in the town and traveled around the area. And it was sort of a watershed moment in my life because I could, instead of imagining what the town was like, I could actually see where the streets they had walked and the areas where they had lived.
And this is present-day Ukraine.
Yes.
Yeah. And they weren't put on trains and sent somewhere. They were marched out in the woods and shot.
Yes. So the area that was east of the area that had been Tsarist Russia, that was taken over and occupied by the Soviets and invaded by the Germans in June 1941. the Jews in that area were taken to the nearby forests and ravines and killed.
Huh.
The deportations were in the east. More to the west.
So they were, the first wave of the Holocaust was they were just shooting them. And they decided that was too slow and tedious, and it made the soldiers demoralized, as I recall. And that 10,000, that's a lot of people to shoot. Just organizing that would be very hard.
In 2 days, and it's one of thousands of places.
Yeah. That's
the local people were more, for whatever reasons, and there were a lot of complicated reasons, were more willing to help.
Yeah.
Whereas the Germans realized that in the West, their neighbors would not be as willing to help, so it was easier to deport people away from their hometowns to mass murder sites and death camps.
For the first time in my life, I watched the movie Fiddler on the Roof. And it's odd that I'd never seen that because there are 3 or 4 of the songs that everybody knows, and I always love them. I didn't realize that it ended so tragically, but they sent them away from the village. Better than what happened to your family, but just turned them out. You just got to find somewhere to go, and you got a week. And that's not uncommon. I know that I know about your grandparents, about your ancestors, but Martin's ancestors, they came from the Pale of Settlement. That's right. That's the place where Jews had to live when they were under Tsarist Russian rule. And they were congregated in that place. And it included parts of Poland, and it's reason so many Polish Jews were killed in the Holocaust. There were just a lot of them. And they were most of their history under Russian domain. And the story in Fiddler on the Roof is about an area under Tsarist rule. And it's interesting, most of the people who made the Bolshevik Revolution were Jews, and they were Jew haters at least as bad as the Tsars. It's amazing and terrible. Now, is it that story and growing up with that story that got you interested in the Holocaust?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Because that was my family. The family that I grew up with had been killed before I was born. So I was always interested in what had happened and how it happened. And my mother said that her town was so small that it wasn't on any map. So in the dinosaur era, before Google Maps and maps everywhere, maps were in books or printed as maps. So I was in Israel, and I found a very interesting book called The Atlas of the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. And in it, I found my mother's hometown.
Oh.
It was the first time I'd seen it in print.
What was the name of the town?
The name of the town is Sarny.
Huh.
And it's I think there were about 5,000 people or so there before the war. It's now still a growing town. It's on the railway line between Vilnius and Lviv, and between Warsaw and Kiev. So when the railroad tracks cross, they cross at Sarny, and Sarny was built in 1900 when the railway came.
And that book was authored by your future husband.
I had no idea.
Yeah, of course.
I don't think I even knew who he was. But when I found the book, then I started reading more of his books. And then I thought someday it would be nice to meet him.
And
then I did.
I wonder when that particular one was published. Because
the Atlas.
Yeah, that Atlas. There's several. He did many. Sir Martin Gilbert, the great historian, about whom we'll talk, published many volumes of historical atlases. And you can find them on Esther's website or on the Amazon store at Hillsdale College. And they're very worth it. And especially they're a very good tool for people who are learning history of any age, but they're a good student tool. And they're very carefully done. And I don't know if it was that particular one or not, but when I was courting my wife in the home of your future husband, we both worked for him. One of our jobs was proofreading atlases. Come to find out they're really hard to proofread because the places have got to be right. And then also he puts these very informative little boxes and arrows of what happened where and what the thing was and descriptions of it all. There's even a joke in my family. Sorry, I have to restrain myself from going into reveries while I'm talking to you today because much of my life has been wrapped up in this as much of your life has been. Another reason I'm so glad to be talking with you. Penny is English, my wife, and talks English. And she said, I remember she pointed and said, "That one's not right." And I said, "What's wrong with it?" She said, "It doesn't have a year." And I said, "What?" And she said, "A year." And I said, "What?" She said, "Year." The way I say it. The British people don't say it. So that's a joke. And if one of us says the word year today, we laugh about it in memory of that. And now, did you conceive an interest in Martin Gilbert from reading that book?
I read his book, The Holocaust, which is sort of a day-by-day account. And I thought, yes, someday I would like to meet him and thank him for giving us our story. I never believed that I actually would meet him. But then many years later, I was in touch with him about a project I was working on to honor someone, and eventually met him at a book launch. And I thought, well, that's cool. I can tick that off my list. I've met Martin Gilbert.
Yeah.
Never believing anything would happen after that.
And what year did you marry him?
We married in 2005.
Yeah. And I can remember distinctly when you came to my knowledge, I was talking on the phone with him. And a girl who had worked for me back in Claremont, by the way, nasally, knew that I was, I talked to Martin quite a lot I met him in 1977, knew him until he died in 2015. But she said, "I met Esther." And I said, "Who might Esther be?" She said, "Oh, you're going to like her." And then it was the next day. I talked on the phone with Martin and I said, "Tell me about Esther." And he said the same thing. He said, "You're going to like her." And I did. Isn't that funny? 2005. Yeah. I'd been president of Hillsdale College for 5 years at that time. And Martin was a fellow of Hillsdale College. Now, this interest that you had, Martin Gilbert, I guess I should say who he was now. He is one of the greatest historians of modern times, certainly of the 20th century. He wrote 88 serious books of history. They break into groups. He was the official biographer of Winston Churchill. There are 31 volumes in that great long series. So there are 8 big volumes of a narrative history of Churchill's life. Most thorough thing, most valuable thing ever written about Churchill. And then there are 23 volumes of documents, some of which I finished after his passing. He and I made an arrangement about that. Because Churchill and his son contrived that whole thing in 1962. And Martin finished the last narrative volume in 1988, I think. It was a very big labor. And then the whole of it was finished in 2018 or 19, I think. And it's a very great thing. You can see it in libraries. You can buy it from Hillsdale College. We sell it at our cost. But that was his, would you say, is it, in quantity terms, he probably worked on Churchill more than any other single thing. Does that seem true?
Definitely. He said it was his life's work.
Yeah. And he told me once, let's check this story. It come to find out I knew Esther's husband longer than Esther did, but of course I'm not nearly the expert on him because nobody knows anybody like a spouse. He got interested in Churchill because he was studying history, and he was very interested in the Holocaust early on. He himself is descended from people who were greatly affected by that. His father was a jeweler in London who changed his name from Goldberg to Gilbert. Martin wasn't always confident that had been a good thing to do. But he found out that Churchill was very sympathetic to the Russian pogroms of 1908 and said some lovely things. And Churchill, in those years, all his life, had some Jewish constituents, and he got close to them, became an advocate for them. And that adjusted Martin Gilbert's life, he told me. He said, this conservative politician, good friend to not slaughtering people because of their religion, and also a good friend to the Jews because of positive qualities they have. He did once, I'm telling my story just for a second now, he once, right after I met him, he said, what do people from Arkansas think about Jews? And I said, well, they never met any. And he said, I said, they like them though. And he said, why? And I said, God's chosen people. That was an early significant conversation we had. I think I'd known him for a week. But also, when I met him, my other great teacher in life is a man named Harry Jaffa, also a Jew. And it's from them that I have learned what I know about Jews. I know a fair amount by now. But the culture and the way of it, if you know people who are Jewish and you get to know them well, you start learning about all that. And I've enjoyed that very much. It's a blessing in my life. So when you met him in 2000, you married him in 2005, met him in what year was that when you first met him?
I met him in 1996, but it took time. We were corresponding.
Yeah.
I was working on, I had met Rudolf Verba, who was one of the 4 escapees from Auschwitz. Mm. Rudolf Verba had tried to warn the world of what was going on and to warn the Hungarian Jews. He escaped in April 1944. And he was living in Vancouver, and I thought that the Canadian government should honor him. And so I wrote to people who had written about Rudolf Verba, and Martin Gilbert was one of the main ones. So I wrote to Martin then, and he wrote back, and we corresponded for a number of years before anything sort of developed. And then life took over.
Yeah. You yourself have written quite a lot about the Holocaust. Describe some of the things you've written. If you go to the martingilbert.com, you'll see some lovely things and important things that Esther has written. Look at all your books back there. What are the things you've written about Israel and about the Jews and the Holocaust?
I was looking for a project of something to do. I was sort of going through a changes in my life. And I had been in business and retired. And I said to Martin, what should I do? He knew I was interested in the Holocaust, and he knew that I was interested in biography. So he said to me, there are a lot of survivor memoirs, and most of them are not indexed. Mm. So if you read them and go through and write down the page numbers where there are various different events, then, that'll be a help. It would be a help to him, so that if he wanted to write and use and quote something from a memoir, he would have to read the whole thing. So I said, well, I can't do that. There are too many memoirs. He said, just do one at a time. And when one's done, go on to the next. So I started doing that. And I found that the page numbers were good, but it was important some of the quotations from the books were so powerful that I included them. So eventually 3 volumes were published as Holocaust Memoir Digest. So you can go through and see the page numbers of the memoir and actual quotes under different events or aspects of what the survivors had gone through. So that really increased my knowledge also. And then I traveled with Martin to Eastern Europe a bit, and I was constantly asking him, and we were discussing. I was always trying to understand how it happened and what happened. And being with him was amazing.
Yeah, he was among his many attributes he was the greatest tour guide I ever saw. In the airplane, he on a plane, he always sat by the window, and he knew where the plane was all the time. And this is, before the digital revolution, where you could have the internet on the plane. And he would send notes to the pilot what we were going over and what had happened in the place. And it was amazing. And when we would go as a sort of reward for finishing a book when I was working for him, I wasn't well paid. I was only justly paid. But one of my rewards was we'd go to Jerusalem and stay in a flat that he had off the old city. And we'd do indexes in the morning. And we usually finished by 11. And then the world was our oyster for the rest of the day. And you'd walk through the old city. And one day we're walking down the Via Dolorosa. And he knew what every building was. And if you didn't carry an excellent guidebook or better 2 with you and refer to it, you weren't being serious about travel. He didn't do that. He already had all the knowledge. And there's an ordinary door, and he stopped and opened it. And it looked like somebody's house on the Via Dolorosa, right down the middle of Jerusalem. The old city is where that is. And he opened the door, and we stepped onto a landing. And about 6 feet below, there's an arch that's been excavated. And how did he know that was there? And I said, oh, goodness, that was the street level. And he said, about the time of Jesus, might have walked under it. Isn't that remarkable? That's what it was like to go anywhere with him. Yeah, very remarkable man. So you were married to Martin for 10 years, and some of those years you had to care for him, an invalid, and I should thank you in public for the care that you gave him, which was spectacular, faithful. But you had good years where you got to go places with him and help him write books. And that's a delightful thing to have happened.
Even the years he wasn't well had their delights.
Yeah.
He wasn't in pain. He wasn't really suffering. And we had wonderful time together in a way. The relationship had changed. It wasn't, the balance was off, but he was still there. And I'm really thankful for those years. They were a very profound time in my life.
I visited him 3 or 4 times in those years. And I found it very touching. But the most touching thing was you, Esther. You couldn't have been a better wife and friend than in those years. You always were, but
Well, I wanted to give him a reason to live.
yeah,
And I thought what I could do was just throw love at him,
yeah.
make sure he knew he was loved, and that would keep him going.
Have you become interested in Churchill yourself over these years?
Some of it has seeped in. My father was a great Churchill fan.
Oh, good. Yeah.
As some of it I have. I've been to a few lectures on Churchill, and I've read a bit, and I've learned a bit, and I think I always was a fan, but more so now.
There's an intersection here that's interesting to me. Hillsdale College has a lot to do with Jewish people these days for a lot of reasons, but one of them is so many colleges are treating them badly, and we don't. And we're a Christian college, but we've never required a faith statement to come here, so we have Jews, and I think we're going to get more. And this intersection with Churchill is very interesting because it was an important thing to Churchill. And it was different. His opinions were different than the opinions of many in the Foreign Office, for example, in Britain. And Churchill fought battles about that all his life. And Martin Gilbert records those battles. And I should say, the single most important thing to know, in my opinion, about Martin Gilbert is that if you read one of his books, it is as reliable as they can possibly be written. And that means that it's very documentary. Martin wrote his books in chronological order. He thought that there's reality in the documents. The documents are what we have from the past. The periods of time he's talking about, there's video evidence too, and audio evidence, but not like today. But that evidence, unless it's faked, will also be, because if it happened at the time, it's the best evidence we've got. Recollections later are good, but not as reliable. And so when he wrote about the Holocaust, you can't write about that without deep feeling, because it's a manufacturing, industrial, transportation effort to slaughter an entire people. The only thing on that scale is Stalin starving people to death. But he wasn't moving them around as much. He just left them where they were and denied them transportation and took all the food away. So this thing is unprecedented. Well, when Martin writes about it, it's amazing. It was always amazing to me how he would keep his balance. There's a book called Auschwitz and the Allies. All his books are very worth reading. And this one is particularly so, because he wrote it as it came up. Why didn't the Allies bomb Auschwitz? And lots of people wrote theories about that. Didn't like the Jews. Stalin wouldn't let them. 100 reasons. There were a lot of reasons. What Martin thought was, let's find out. And he wrote a wonderful book. And what he showed was there were a lot of reasons they didn't bomb that camp to smithereens. They did bomb it once by accident. But I was the one who I did whatever he asked me to do. I worked in the Foreign Office files the most. And that there was some obstruction there. I remember the name of the man who I thought could have done a lot better job back then. I won't say it. It's in the book. You can read it. You'll see it. But Martin was never carried away by that. He said, there's a war on. There's a lot going on. There's a relatively narrow window in the war when it was possible to bomb Auschwitz. And the reasons why they didn't do it more, they could have done it more. have something to do with bad opinions about Jews, but that's not all. Stalin had to approve the missions, and there's a war on. And Stalin wanted missions that would disrupt the Nazi army. And so, anyway, that I just thought when he'd finished that book, and there's another famous historian who wrote a book, a very famous historian who wrote a book at the same time. And his book has a different tone. His book blames the West for the Holocaust more. And I when the book was written, I said to him, "You did a great thing here." And he said, "What thing?" And I said, "You didn't join up to place the blame where it was fashionable to place it." And his response to me was, "It was Hitler who killed the Jews." Lest we forget that.
When I started reading his books, one of the things that really impressed me was that he didn't tell me what to think. He just wrote what happened, which is what I wanted to know. I wanted to know what happened, and I realized that he thought I had the intelligence to make up my own mind.
Yeah.
Without being bombarded with opinion. It was just, this is what happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and it happened in that order, and it had to happen in that order because the third day wouldn't have happened without the first day. So it's how he wrote it, and that was his approach, and I found it very helpful.
Well, he was that's not the style either today. I once went to Lady Soames, Churchill's youngest child, who I knew pretty well and liked, and I told Martin before I went, it's the first step. This is in the 80s when I did this, and I was more grown up than when I worked for him. I was a graduate student when I worked for him. But I said, I'm going to go talk to them. And he said, "Oh, good. What are you going to say?" And I said, well, the main reason I'm going is I want things organized so that this biography can be finished, including the document volumes. I put a lot of time into it. Eventually he put 3 decades into it. And it's hard work, and you're doing it largely with your own resources now. And so there needs to be a plan in case it's not done. And I said, my second purpose concerns you more. I'm going to tell her how important it is that you're doing this work. And I did. I really liked her. And I said, ma'am, I said, I know that there are voices, I've heard them, that think that this biography should be shorter and more popular. But you've got a very unusual man doing it. Nobody else would do it like this. It became much larger, even than he knew it would be when he took the job. And I said, your father is going to be controversial for as long as his name is known, and that will be as long as such names are known. And the only way to sort those controversies out is to look at the record. And now the record is being published. Martin would say, if you said perhaps to him, it was just like this, he'd say, perhaps not. He'd say, in the writing of 19th and 20th century history, there's no room for the word perhaps. These phrases that were beaten into me by him, although he wasn't a beater. And see, that's a statement about reality, right? And I teach Aristotle at Hillsdale College, studied him with Harry Jaffa. And one of the things you learn is incredibly valuable, and that is that the source of knowledge, that word source is a very big word in Aristotle. The source of knowledge is not in any opinion about it. The source of knowledge is in the thing to be known. And Martin Gilbert that's a metaphysical precept And I think Martin Gilbert knew that as well as Harry Jaffa being an Aristotle scholar. And I think that's such a blessing that, and that means for our listeners here, that if you're going to read a historian's account of something, there's one historian whose opinion would be, read the documents themselves. But if you don't have time for that, I will tell you what they say. And that's and in this day and age, you must be appalled by what happened on college campuses in America in the spring. I am. We didn't have any of that here. But what did you think about it?
It's frightening.
Yeah, it is frightening, isn't it? And talk about that.
It's if Jews aren't safe in Israel, they're not safe anywhere.
Yeah.
And this has now been proven.
Yeah.
It's been shown to be true.
That's right.
And I just don't understand. I just don't understand.
Yeah, I have a theory about that. I have an opinion about it. It's not a theory. You can only explain the actions of these demonstrators by explaining you can see what they do, and you can see what they say. But then, and that's all you can ever know of anybody's motives. But that's another thing you learn from Martin Gilbert. You have to compare what they say and what they do. But what they say is that the Israelis are colonizers. Well, first of all, what's a colony? A lot of these kids are 19 years old. They should be learning things like that. What is a colony? What form of government is that? And then they're on our land, somebody else's land. That's a historical proposition. Martin Gilbert has explained all that. And the story, in one way, is very complex, but in another way, it's terribly simple. It's a story that goes back to sometime long about 1870. The modern phase of it, when Jews in Europe started thinking maybe they needed a homeland, somewhere to collect, and it culminates. One culmination is in 1948 when the Jewish state was recognized. Well, what happened in between those two things? It's not that long a period of time. And all that land was Ottoman land, and the Ottomans joined the Germans in the First World War and lost all that land because they made that disastrous decision. And then the Allies who won the war had made some deals with some Arabs and some Jews. If you'll fight for us, we'll give you a homeland. In Palestine, somewhere in the case of the Jews, a homeland. Didn't say state, a homeland. And the point is, several Arab countries come from exactly the same set of facts. Fight for us, you get this. And so that looks to me like that's just somewhere near the heart of the matter, right? And then the land that was given to the Jews, there were several plans. What they got was the smallest of the plans, and it is objectively tiny. And so it looks to me like you can't say it's illegitimate without saying a whole bunch of other countries are illegitimate. Well, and so that gets me to my opinion. I don't think they're studying things like that in those colleges. I don't think that they are. The purpose of those colleges, very elite colleges, some of them older than Hillsdale College, which is very old. Its purpose is for them to study things like that. And on the argument that the source of knowledge is not in your opinion, it's in the thing to be understood. And learning is a process of correcting your opinions. You see, and they're not doing that at all. And I think that means that.
But hasn't the study of history changed a lot in the last several decades, where opinion has become more important?
Yeah.
And I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're right. In other words, if I am describing accurately the disposition of the elite colleges, it means that scholarship and knowledge themselves have been called into question, or failed to pursue them. But that's Martin. That's your husband, right? He is the chief rebel against that trend in modern times. He gave it no quarter. He wouldn't put up with it. There's a really good A&E series, Arts and Entertainment Network, maybe with the BBC, that he did on Churchill. And in the later phase of it, he told me the story. They announced that they were bringing somebody else in for balance. And he said, fine. He said, but have I got something wrong? And they said, oh, no. And he said, then what are you balancing exactly? You see, that's not. And I'm in the education business now for a long time, and I can tell you, there's no motive to learn unless there's a truth to be discovered. And if the truth is in your opinions, then there's no reason why. Just make them up. And I think that's what's going on. And I think this in America, where it's hardly known in American history, there is hatred of Jews in the colleges and breaking out into the streets. And that's unthinkable and horrific to me. I think the Jews are like the canary in the coal mine.
Right.
If you're bad to them, you'd probably be bad to anybody. And
it doesn't stop there.
It doesn't stop. Can't stop there. No. What kills the canary will kill the rest of the miners too. Yeah, I think that those facts are very grim. And I think I'm a person who believes in our alliance with Israel, as did Winston Churchill. And I believe that Churchill believed, and I believe that alliance needs to be in the interest of our country for us to sacrifice for it. And I think that it is. And certainly those, if you hear Churchill talk about the Jews, when he only went once, but when he went to Middle East, amazing what they come up with. Good allies. And one way that they're good, it's kind of a hard nails kind of way. Churchill had a friend in Chaim Weizmann, who was first president, I think, of the state of Israel after it was born. But what he was when Churchill met him was a chemist working in Manchester, if I remember correctly. And he invented a way to synthesize cordite, which is what made shells go off and explode in the First World War. And Churchill was Minister of Munitions. And Chaim Weizmann was a friend of his for the rest of Churchill's life. Weizmann outlived him. Anyway, that's, you shouldn't mean ill to any people, but you should mean friendship to, as they say in the Declaration of Independence, the good people of these colonies. Hereby treat you in peace, friends, in war, opponents, enemies. So, yeah, I think it's shocking to me that it's so systematic, all spring long. They couldn't, and the most shocking single thing to me is the colleges that are in the papers are rich and run by people who are all in agreement with each other about all those big things, right? They've remade those colleges in name of those big things. And I thought, okay, had their fun. At some point, they're hurting the college. They'll tell all these people, go back to work. We got to have school now. And I thought they would do that. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't. They ceased to function. And that's very serious. So I worry about that a lot. And
very frightening times, very grim times.
Yeah.
And Martin was a great optimist, and I'm trying hard to be optimistic.
Yeah.
But some days it's really tough.
It is tough. But, American politics are disarranged in ways that I think are fundamentally threatening. But that's just a political manifestation of this thing we've been talking about on the campuses. And so there you go. But the solution is also, I think I know what that is. I think if you want to develop opinions about the Middle East, very controversial area, very important area, as old as Western recorded history, it has been important and controversial. And if you want to make up your mind about that controversy, you should probably read about it. And you can. And Martin Gilbert wrote the books, I'll tell you a favorite story, and then you have to tell me one. One of my favorite stories was they're making films of Holocaust survivors. And this is in the 2000s sometime. And Martin Gilbert, I once observed a conversation he had with one of the people producing them. Very friendly conversation. Of course, he admired the lady. But he said, I think you should change your methodology. And the lady said, oh, how? And he said, all the conversations are the same. You start with their arrest, and then you end with whatever record there is of their death. You should talk about their stories before they were arrested. How'd they live? What was their life like? And, if you look in Martin Gilbert's books, there's lots of accounts of how the people lived before this disaster. Mm-hmm. And, that's one of my favorite stories about him. What's your favorite story about him?
My favorite story? I don't know.
Yeah, too many.
Too many?
Yeah.
Give me a hint. Give me a topic. Help me out.
Well, there's one of my favorite stories is about him. Is him around you. He was happier around you than I saw. He was a happy man. Lord, did he not work too? How did he write 88 big books? But he always had a joy about him. Always fun to travel with him. But happiest, I think, around you. And you were good for him.
I was lucky.
Yeah, you're like that. You always say that. But he was lucky too. He was very lucky. Okay, what else?
He had, he was evacuated to Canada as a 3-year-old during the war.
Yeah, oh yeah,
he was evacuated 4 times from London, but the third time was to Canada. He came as a 3-year-old alone. His parents were in London, and he spent nearly 4 years in Canada before he came back.
Mm.
And I felt, and especially when he was ill, I thought he was alone as a child. He was with a foster family in Toronto. But at the end of his life, he should have friends and family. He should know that he was loved. He should know what he's accomplished.
Yeah.
And that, that I tried to give him. Mm. But in terms of his work, he was always writing. He was writing postcards. We would travel. When I first met him, he would travel with a suitcase of his correspondence. And I finally got him to leave it home, but he would bring his address book and postcards, buy postcards everywhere.
Yeah.
We went on a cruise where he was lecturing on Churchill. and we would stop at these exotic places, and he would go to the first postcard shop, and he'd say, pick a postcard you'd like. And I'd pick a few, and he picked handfuls of postcards. And then we went to the post office, and he couldn't just buy stamps. He had to buy the most beautiful, different, exotic stamps. And then we went to the beach. While all people were from the cruise were all doing these excursions, we would sit on the beach, and he would order a fruit juice, and he'd go through his address book and address 50 postcards and then put stamps across the top and send them to everybody he knew.
Yeah, many of those.
And he was continually always writing.
Yeah, he never stopped. He one time he announced to me 2 or 3 times in later years, he would I'd go to London and he would cook me dinner in his place. This is you weren't there. When was this been? And one time we had a glass of wine, which he didn't typically do. And he held up his wine and he said, I want you to congratulate me. I've retired. And I laughed in his face. And he said, you just laughed in my face. I said, I did. And he said, you don't think I've retired? I said, no, I don't. And he said, I have. And I said, never going to write another book. Well, he said, well, I didn't say that. He was a great man.
When I met him at the book launch, and the first thing he got up and spoke, and he said, "This is my last public lecture," and my heart sank because I thought, I wanted to invite him to organize an audience for him, but it wasn't his. Luckily for all of us,
no, he
it
never
wasn't
stopped.
his last public lecture.
Yeah, I never worried about that. He's because, as you say, he was. There's a very learned man here. I'm not going to say his name, but he's one of the most learned men I know, and I've known him for 50 years. And he's written 5 books, excellent books. One of them, Cambridge University Press, and I've always wanted him to write more. And he's over years he said to me, "Well, I'm not like Martin Gilbert." And then one time he said, how did he do it? And I said, well, first of all, there's a thing. I said, if you're going to write that many books, it means when 9 o'clock in the morning comes, you're going to be sitting at your desk with your pen in your hand. I said, that's one way he did it. Okay, what else do I want to talk about?
The other thing is when he was going through the Churchill papers, and I believe it was Bill Deacon who said to him, when you're going through the papers, you'll find things that you may want to write about later. So make a note of it, take a copy of it. And he did. And so he collected this vast archive.
Yeah.
And when he sat down to write, he had all the books in front of him. He had all the papers in front of him. And he knew what he wanted to write because he had done his own research.
Yeah.
And he had everything to hand. So that also made it easier for him to write a lot. He loved writing. It's what he did. And he had all the materials there.
Yeah, and he wasn't, it was all in chronological order. And that meant that when he was looking for something, all he had to do was remember about what time it was. And I remember when I was there, courting my wife, working for him, and there'd be, she worked in the house all the time. I worked 2 or 3 days a week, and I was out and about other than that, looking up stuff. But I would go to the public record office, and I was different from everybody else there. Because, first of all, it's a government office. It's kind of fancy. It's new back then. But it's, they let you in at 9, not exactly promptly. They start hustling you out about 4:30 in the afternoon. And you're there, and that's where all the documents are. And you can't go browse around on them. You have to put in for them. You look in the catalog, find them, and put in for them. So you get good at it because you first of all, you learn that don't go just one day. Always go at least 3 days in a row. Because the last thing you do on every day is order your documents for in the morning, and it gives you a 30-minute head start. And then the next thing is when your documents come, immediately order more. And the third thing is he wants a photocopy of everything. And they were expensive. And you would indicate what you want copied with a flag, the British call them. It's a strip of paper that's been chopped up. And you stick it on and they copy that opening. And I would use 10 times as many flags as anybody else. And I would spend hundreds of pounds a week. And Martin didn't have any money. And, I grew up in a house where we didn't have very much money, right? And all the signs of it were everywhere. And I would say to him, once I said to him, I could spend less. I know my way around now. And he grabbed my hand right here and said, you must get everything. And I thought, see, he had to have it all. And toward the end there, later in our lives, he stopped asking me to verify that I got everything. He would say, did you? And I'd look at him and say, okay, like that. That's like winning a medal when he would do that. What are you going to do next? He was a
scholar.
What?
He was a scholar.
He was a scholar. He was a great scholar. What are you going to do now? You write about the Holocaust. You keep Martin Gilbert's legacy alive. What's the big things that are going to happen?
I do a monthly newsletter with excerpts from his work and little bits by me. I'm trying to keep his books in print. Churchill of Life is coming out with a new edition in September, October. So that's exciting. I'm trying to keep his books in print and trying to get them read and, keep things going. Yeah. And it puts me in touch really with people wherever around and in the UK and the US and it's good. And then I'm raising a puppy.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
And trying to spend time with grandchildren.
I have grandchildren are the most important thing. I have 2.
Yeah.
And I have a recently married daughter, and she comes under pressure from her father about the children question. Her mother is too polite to do that to her, so I carry that entire load. Esther, you're a great woman, and martingilbert.com. And if anybody has a question about Martin Gilbert or the Holocaust or Churchill, I'm not committing her to answer, but a way to contact her is on that website or through me. And she's a delightful woman. Meet her if you get a chance. Thank you.
Thank you.